That actually leads me on to something I wanted to ask you about. Because you are you're a comic book artist, and
Oh, right,
you
thanks. Yeah, yeah, yeah. How do you get so dumb? Is your next question, isn't it?
no. You're a comic book artist, and
Yes.
you have been a comic book artist for quite a long time.
Yeah.
You can have certain writers that will do a particular run, like they'll do a 12-issue run of Batman, for example, and so they're not necessarily creating new characters. It's set in, it'll be set in Gotham, and Alfred will be there, and all the characters will be there. But it's the writer's interpretation of those characters. I just wondered, obviously, in your life as a comic book artist, you've written comic books and you've drawn comic books and you've done the lettering in comic books. How do you find that collaborative process, and do you prefer it to, when you were just 16 and running your own comic books through the school photocopier to make more copies of them?
I think they both exist at the same time in a very different way. You know what I mean?
Okay.
So this year I've made it my mission to try and get as many professional level books out.
Yes.
Because last year I released one book, and it was a zine about a man falling in love with Spider-Man.
Yes. Pictures
Yeah.
of Spider-Man.
Yes. And it did really well, but it was still the one book I did, and I was like, you know what? Maybe working by myself isn't really giving me the ability to put the output that I would like into the world.
Sure. Yeah.
So I've started writing things for people, and I've made some creative partnerships, But Corsair is the first book I'm doing. It's sort of a magic detective type story in the lines of Hellboy and Constantine, but very much focused around Northern English folk tales and magic.
Yes.
And me just trying to borrow as much local history as I possibly can. But that's drawn by a lady from Alabama, which is amazing because you have to try and
Yeah, that is.
you have to try and explain so much about English culture to her. And I remember the first time she drew me, I said a bit of it in Leeds, and I was telling her what Leeds is like, and she drew me a picture of New York, and I'm like, nah, you're way off. And we had to sort of get back to the drawing board, and like she drew me a factory, and she drew me the most amazing factory you've ever seen. But it looked like the North Sea gas works rather than like a shitty mill that you'd get in Huddersfield.
I'm kind of picturing this conversation going like you're being interviewed by the police and you're being asked to describe the man who mugged you, and and at the end the guy turns around, the artist turns around like the artist impression, and you're just like, nah,
Yeah,
not even close. Like you're sitting there, you're sitting there in like a dimly lit room, and you're trying to describe Leeds, and she's just adding more and more skyscrapers.
But and then the artwork's being coloured by a lady from Ireland called Dervla Kelly. So you've got a three-way point of communication. I've written something down,
Sure.
then committed to somebody else, then communicate the artwork, and then communicate the colours. And it's really quite interesting. But then at the same time, there is nothing that quite beats just sitting down at the end of the day and going, I'm going to do this by myself. So they exist independently from one another. I think that both have their advantages. You can't say that one is ultimately like the most purest form of your art because you'll create two different things. I could never create Corsair by myself.
Yes. Yeah,
I could never
that's true.
create anything with that particular atmosphere, with that particular character movement, with that particular sense of style. It's a story that I couldn't tell by myself, and I think that working with people gives me a wider range of stories I can tell.
Yeah, I think it's applicable to other artistic disciplines as well. Although especially it seems like especially so with comic books, because just the fact that someone is drawing it and then somebody else is providing the color,
Hmm.
like if those two people aren't on the same wavelength, or have wildly different interpretations of the material, you could very easily end up with an aesthetic which is completely inconsistent and just makes no sense.
Well, I always think the really weird one is the relationship between the penciler and the inker.
I did not even realize those were two separate jobs. Please carry on.
Oh yeah, shit yeah. So in mainstream comic books, like Batman, to use an example, you have a writer, then there will be a penciler, then there will be an inker, then there will be a colorist, then there'll be a letterer.
So each of those layers goes down separately and goes down through different people.
Yeah. So
Wow.
you look at again, Batman. The artwork was being done. The writing was being done by Scott Snyder for Scott Snyder's Batman, which
Uh-huh.
was when the New 52 happened, and they basically they rebooted. They rebooted Batman to give him a new origin story and things like that, and it was really good. It was
Sure. This is something which well, this is just something which comic book corporations do from time to time. Like they'll throw in a big sort of reset to zero,
yes.
basically.
So Greg Capullo was doing the pencils, and Jonathan Glapion was doing the inks, and everything that Glapion draws looks like something that Glapion has drawn. Everything that Capullo draws looks like Capullo's draws. So you get this strange marriage between the two. You get, and it
And yet they're both existing in the same image. It's not like they're alternating pages or alternating
no.
panels.
They're existing at the same time. It's a marriage of styles immediately. It's not like one person's doing one thing, one person's doing another. They're both doing the same thing.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Actually, that's another question I wanted to ask you. I suppose how do you feel about one of your main artistic outlets being in such a niche medium?
It doesn't bother me. No.
Really? Okay, go on.
The thing is that like I think that when you're talking about sales, you're talking about hundreds of thousands, like tens of thousands, or,
Sure, yeah.
or even just bulks of thousands. But I don't ever see there being a sort of downgrade in sales because I can only produce so many and only
Oh,
sell so
okay.
many. So I don't. I make 100 comic books. If I say if I make a 300 comic book run, like I will go to the printer and buy 300 books.
Sure.
Then they'll sell at a reasonable pace. Then they're gone. It's not like I have to have like if my books were coming out weekly, I'd be like, well, that sold 10,000, this sold so. I just keep making more. So I think that the interaction in the indie comic books is completely different to the mass market.
So because even what would be considered a bad year for, or like a catastrophically bad year for a major comic book publisher, even then those numbers are so much bigger than the numbers at which you're processing at. It
Yeah.
kind of passes you by a little bit.
Absolutely. And the other thing as well is that you think about it, Superman 1, they do a relaunch next week, just for the sake of it. Superman 1 comes out, it's out for a month.
Yes.
Maybe, the month down the line they do a reprint with a new cover. But, there is a point where maybe 6 months down the line they'll stop making that book.
Yeah.
Maybe they'll go to fourth printing, fifth printing if it's a big thing, sixth if it's insane. They'll stop making the book. Me, I've been carting around 50 Signal 1 for 2 years.
That's true, actually. Yeah, a comic book which you wrote in 2015.
Yeah, if I turn up to a convention and don't have a copy of number 1, then people are less likely to buy number 2.
Yeah, you need that continuity, don't you?
Yeah, people need to be able to pick it up and go, right, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, so on and so forth. And it's still a big seller for me, it's 50 Signal 1, despite the fact it's 2 years old, because every single time I go to a convention, I'm not meeting the same people. It's not direct delivery. I'm even if I turn to the same convention and the same number of guests who are all exactly the same people turn up year on year, chances are I will still manage to sell the same number of books because I will meet different and interact with different people on that particular day.
Sure, yeah. I suppose that's in that case my question is kind of irrelevant then, because my question was about the medium of comic books and how it is very niche. But I suppose at the independent end that isn't quite so much of a factor, because the performance of the wider industry doesn't really have an effect on you.
Yeah, that and the fact is, it's with all niche markets. Niche markets are great because people who are into that need to go and seek out what they're into.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, I sell a lot, just people stumble upon it and buy it online for some reason, or something gets recommended, but the majority of your sales are built up through conventions. So you'll turn to a convention, you'll sell a bunch of comic books to people, and then afterwards there'll be a spike in internet sales where they'll go, hey, remember when I saw that thing? And then they'll buy it.
Yeah, and I think you talk about niche sales, and you talk about about having to actually go and seek out something. I'm sure that there must have been a point in the history of the comic book industry when the decision was made to stop selling comic books at mass media outlets like newsstands and supermarkets, and start sort of drawing back into specialist comic book shops. Which in every city I've ever been to where there's been a comic book shop, it's always been small and often hard to find.
Oh, yeah.
And that's really just the same thing in practice, isn't it? Because it's withdrawing from a mass market and choosing to focus on a niche market instead.
It used to be how vinyl shops were.
Yeah, that's true, actually. Yeah,
There was a bleak point in the, I want to say, like mid-noughties where your vinyl shops were going, and they were always small and they're always off somewhere.
Yeah. You get vinyl in Tesco now. It's brilliant.
Yeah. So you can't go into W. Smith's and pick up a single issue of like Spider-Man 536 or something. But you can go into W. Smith's and pick up a copy of Saga.
Yes.
And I remember maybe 10 years ago, you could go in, you could buy your old X-Men book. There'd be like a really small section with an X-Men book in it, and maybe they chuck in a couple of, you have a bunch of superhero comic books, maybe a 2000 AD collection, like a Judge Dredd book, and then you'd have like Clive Barker's The Yattering and Jack or something, some literary adaptation just to sort of remind you that real books exist. But now you can go in and you can buy a best-selling Image comic book series. So to me, it's not that the market has, maybe single issue sales aren't that hot, but aftermarket and volume trades, but also the fact that people are into a much wider interest of things now. So I think it's good. It's a good time to be making books because people are a lot more open. There was a period of time where if you didn't make a book with a superhero in, people probably wouldn't buy it.
You might be the first person in the last 5 years to say that it's a good time to be making books. I don't think I've heard anybody say that in all of the 2010s.
I was talking to a guy. Sometimes when you do like comic book things, they don't know what to do with you because you're an actual comic book guy. So I went to, I'm not going to name names because it was a great event and I'm making it sound crap, but I went to one and it was some form of local geek thing, and I think I was the only person who actually was making comic books.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but it was like, comics and stuff, and then it was just me, and I was next to a real life author who had like 3 books out from a major publisher. They're all fantasy books. I downloaded one on Audible and it was really quite cool. Okay. But he had 3 books out from a major publisher, and we're talking, and he's talking about how Audible and the Kindle have been godsends because they just generate free revenue, basically.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a slightly altered business model, isn't it? And I obviously the production costs for something like a Kindle are much lower. I always kind of conceive of it as being like the book version of iTunes, you know.
I think it depends what you want to make out of it, because he was, he wasn't rich. He didn't come in on a gold moped and then like fly out the window. He didn't put spinning rims in a solid gold jet ski or anything. He wasn't rich. He made a living. He was content to do that. But I think he enjoyed telling a story and doing it. But also I think that he was just content with the idea of people reading his books. He just enjoyed doing it.
I mean, that's the situation which I think most artists, if they were honest, like that's the ideal situation.
Absolutely.
Being comfortably supported by your work and just glad of the fact that people are interacting with it in some way.
Absolutely.
That's the dream, right?
To
be able to live slightly comfortably.
Yeah. Tell me about it.